What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty B here with another episode of Steelers Touch and Under. We're talking how does the Steelers' potential OC candidates affect who the Steelers might want to go with at quarterback this season. Now, right now, Kenny Pickett is the one on the roster contracted. Mason Rudolph is yet to be given the contract. We've heard him on the Ramon Foster show. We've heard him make some comments. We've heard him put up some pictures that suggest that they want him back in Pittsburgh. He wants to be back there. You also heard Mike Tomlin say that in his end-of-season press conference. But Kenny Pickett's the guy that's on the roster right now. So is technically Mitch Trubisky, but we all expect Mitch Trubisky to be moved on within the next few weeks, right? And that being not necessarily 2 or 3, but ahead of the new league year starting end of Feb, early March. So Steelers have been linked to a number of different people. Now, the first person was Cliff Kingsbury. We talked about that on the channel. Then it's sort of come out through some Pittsburgh media and sources in the last 24 hours or so, depending on when you watch this, that perhaps he's not actually going to come for an interview. Why does that make sense for me? That makes sense for me because when you look at Cliff Kingsbury, he's probably going to need a draft. Even though Kenny Pickett is mobile, he is probably going to have to actually draft a guy if they're going to make that offense work. There's probably not someone on there that's on the roster right now, or I can say there isn't. And there's probably not a guy out there in free agency, maybe Baker Mayfield, that is going to give you a remotely what Kyler Murray gives you. And is that the right thing for the Steelers offense anyway? Probably not. But I think most Steelers fans are really happy that at least the conversation's had. Secondly, you then look at the wider pool of names. Now, we're talking about they've interviewed Thomas Brown by the time I've done this video. They have been linked to Jared Johnson. Apparently, that interview's taken place as well. They have also been linked to Clint Kubiak, Zach Robinson they're bringing in, and there's rumors about would they bring in Eric Bieniemy, and then there's obviously other names that float around like Arthur Smith out of the Falcons. I don't see them really doing that. And of course, it depends. Maybe they do the due diligence with Ben Johnson from the Lions, but I think he's got a coaching gig lined up. I think Washington want him. I think that's where you'll see that fall unless the Seahawks can try and pull a rabbit out of the hat. So suddenly, it doesn't fully make sense in terms of what they're fully going to do. Now, I like the fact they spoke to Thomas Brown from the Panthers, except for the fact that he's more of that tight ends running backs coach. I'm not sure that's even if the Steelers want to really keep up this run game. I'm not sure that's where they should be going. I do think they need someone more on that passing quarterback sort of whisperer sort of style thing. So when we look at, if we go through name by name, Zach Robinson is probably going to be really good for Mason Rudolph in terms of bringing him back. There's the narrative out there that they roomed together when Mason Rudolph was at college. I think when you think about Matt Stafford and you think about what the Rams have done from that perspective, it probably can work with Kenny Pickett. But I think with Mason Rudolph and sort of these deep passes, being on time with your receivers, having that chemistry, particularly if you're not going to move on Deontay Johnson, that could kind of work, the Zach thing. Then you look at, as I say, going back to Thomas Brown. You do look at the Steelers and what they've invested at tight end with Darnell Washington and Pat Freiermuth and Connor Haywood. I still think they need to bring in another vertical guy. And you look at the running backs in Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. If you brought in Thomas Brown, it would make sense from a personnel perspective. While I don't think that solves your quarterback challenge, it does make sense from what the Steelers have got on the roster right now. Then you go and look at Clint Kubiak, obviously passing game coordinator right now with the 49ers, who are still in the hunt, so they can't speak to him yet. He was with the Minnesota Vikings before, with Cousins obviously there. He was with the Denver Broncos in 2022. That was obviously not the best year from what was going on there. Before that, he was back with the Denver Broncos as well. So he's been through a lot of different quarterbacks, so he's seen a lot. He's the passing game coordinator now, so he can put it together. It's kind of interesting because if you think about it, imagine Mason Rudolph with the weapons that Brock Purdy has. It'd be pretty decent. Think about Kenny Pickett with the weapons that Brock Purdy has. Probably a bit better. At least probably more points are on the board. It might not be fully set, but more points on the board. And then you flip and you think about Brock Purdy in the Steelers offense, and you probably got a lot of question marks. So that kind of is exciting for me because if you think about Clint Kubiak, you've got a guy where he could probably maximize whatever Mason's got while they do ride out and figure out Kenny Pickett in a preseason, then maybe they're drafting a guy in 2025. But he also is probably one of the best players out there to be able to help Kenny Pickett improve. Because if you imagine Kenny Pickett in San Francisco, I think Kenny Pickett would do a lot better than what Kenny Pickett's done in Pittsburgh. Just plain and simple. So I really like the idea of Clint Kubiak. Eric Bieniemy, I like what he did with Sam Howell. I don't think Kenny Pickett's that mobile. I think Pittsburgh's got it more together. I still think Eric Bieniemy, though, wants to fight for this head coaching job. I think that's still there for him. I don't know if I fully love it from the fully calling the plays. It's not the worst thing in the world. I think it'd be more of a fit than Cliff Kingsbury. But I don't know. There's something, I don't know. I don't know whether it's the right position right now. And I don't know whether the Steelers are going to spend I just don't think they're going to spend the money to bring him in. You then also look at a guy like Frank Reich. Now, I think that Panthers situation has gone terribly. I almost think he needs that year out, or I just don't like that with the Steelers. I don't see that being a thing. I know Mike Tomlin likes his old heads, but I think it's a chance for the Steelers to bring someone into their organization that could be a future head coach. That's what I would like to see, and I want to see someone on the cutting edge of offenses, not someone that's been, had it fail the last few years, to bring more an older style to it. I don't love it. And then you look at Jared Johnson. That's the one name I think I mentioned earlier in the show, but if I haven't covered him, he was brought in, as I said, this week. He's from Texas A&M, but that's where he played. That's where he played football. He was with the Dallas Cowboys for a while, with the Baltimore Ravens, with the Chicago Bears. He even had a little bit of a time on the Steelers practice squad, or a reserve futures contract. But he was one of the coaches with the Texans this year in terms of their passing and quarterbacks. And so that offers you a lot. But at the same time, we've only seen 1 year of that, and we've seen that with CJ Stroud. Now, CJ Stroud's had a terrific year. But CJ Stroud is a much better pocket passer, much more developed prospect than Kenny Pickett at this point. So my top quarterback going in the last year's draft was much better than Young. And I think obviously we all saw that. It's easy for me to say, but you can go back and look at our videos back last year, and I said CJ Stroud was the best in that draft. You still probably thought Kenny Pickett might have been slightly ahead to start the season, but by gosh, did CJ Stroud show his pedigree. So then it brings me to think, well, all right, let's assume they're bringing back Mason and they're bringing back, and they're not bringing back Mitch Trubisky. And I've not covered on who he's a fit with at all, because I don't think he fits on the roster with the salary amount, and he's proven that he's not a serviceable backup, at least for the Steelers. And you think about drafting players, you think about drafting a quarterback where they're sitting at 20. I don't necessarily think any of those quarterback coaches would force that. Whereas any of the offensive coordinator candidates would force that outside of Cliff Kingsbury. Now, obviously, they're not going to be able to force the Steelers to do anything, but they're going to need that to be successful. And so that's where I think the Steelers probably did a bit of back and forth. I think, obviously, as well, the Chicago situation, maybe in the Seahawks, I think that there's other opportunities for Cliff Kingsbury, maybe to be a head coach, or maybe on a fast track to head coach versus having to sit behind Mike Tomlin. But again, I did that show. You can go back and watch it. It's not like Cliff Kingsbury is like the offensive whisperer of the NFL. He's had times in his tenure where it's not gone well. A lot of his experiences at the collegiate level anyway. Not to say that that's wrong, not to say that that's not good enough. He worked a lot with Pat Mahomes. He worked a little bit with USC by all reports this year, and Caleb Williams. But it's not like he's automatically going to make Kenny Pickett throw for 3,800 yards, be fit every game, throw 20 touchdowns plus. Like, it's just not going to be that way. But any of these guys that the Steelers are speaking with, surely apart maybe from Thomas Brown, but obviously the run game touchdowns can pick up, surely these guys will be able to come in and improve the Steelers' 13 passing touchdowns. That is atrocious. That needs to be 32 plus next season if the Steelers are going to do something. But yeah, this is sort of my top line thoughts on how do the Steelers offensive coordinator candidates, how do they affect the quarterback situation? How does the quarterback situation with the Steelers affect them? And what are these sort of pairings between quarterbacks and offensive coordinator options look like for 2024? And then obviously there might be more people added to the mix over the next couple of days as the playoffs progress, as people are knocked out. As teams are knocked out of the playoffs, people will become available for interview. all these things could happen. But Steelers doing their due diligence. And I did hear in the narrative spoken about before that you probably want to wrap this up by the Senior Bowl. Senior Bowl is 3rd of Feb. Senior Bowl is next weekend. Therefore, next Saturday in America. So with that, the Steelers are probably going to make a decision on this pretty quickly. And with that, we may even see a Mike Tomlin extension. But I'm Matty P. As always, go Steelers.